W- Well, so anyway, now we're here at the interview of the programmer Thomas Tomasek.
And his aging is the opposite of the graphics guy. Now he vaguely looks like Ashens.
In a way.
His younger self, though, is like me if I take a straightener to my afro. I was 36 in 2008. For at least 11 years, I'm related to the C industry, albeit in computer science terms. And in contrast to the other three dudes, I still live in Stettin, where I live my stormy life with wife and two sons. In World Software, I was a programmer. Sea industry, stormy life. Is this guy like Atlas, the god of the sea? What was your first computer? Ironically, my first computer was an Atari 130 XE, bought by my grandma in secret from my mom and PUX for 199 US dollars. Alas, we couldn't further afford a cassette tape drive, and thus came my passion for programming, because I had to type in the programs by myself, through computer science magazines. For obvious reasons, I lost every single work every time I had to turn off my computer. That just sounds like hell for programmers. At the time, it allowed me to type in lots of code. Obviously, BASIC was the programming language. I'll admit that I didn't see any commercial games in this Atari. I just had nothing to load anything with. Were you already learning programming back then? Sure. When I typed in everything that was in the magazines, I was then porting non-basic programs into the basic language, and then I went on doing something myself. I, of course, started out with modifying and enhancing the programs. It seems funny today, writing something that would get lost with the lack of power. But my notebook served as my tape drive, in which I wrote down everything that was necessary, and I have that notebook even to this day. After a few months, the Atari was sold. Wait, didn't he just say he kept that notebook to this day? Oh, wait, this is a different computer, I think. And for a while, I had nothing. The ZX Spectrum was my passion, however. My cousin's Timex 2048, to be specific. I borrowed the machine a few times and played games on the Rubin TV, on Secam Standard, obviously. The TV also had the NTSC system and showed colors, but the colors were a bit wrong. So the screen wasn't completely monochrome. Timex 48 appeared on my first Liu Creme semester.
Hold on. Hold on, let me just. Hold on. Hold on, let me just. What is the question again? Because I think.
So he was like, "Were you already learning programming back then?" And he's like,
Oh, yeah.
um, "Timex 2048 appeared on my first Lyceum semester."
Lithium.
Tims.
Well,
Your
but
alphabet's confusing me.
and to say nothing how confusing my Polish education system may be to to you people. I think that could be like the high school or something.
And that was my last successful semester. I spent free time and passion on this black box, whose temperature caused me to occasionally work with gloves. Yeah, dude, change your computer. That is one of the more concerning things I've read. Not kidding. Programming passion have appeared alongside my gaming passion. I even had a special Spectra video, tape drive, and a green Neptune 156 monitor with headphones that was the shit. The green screen with the composite signal didn't tire my eyes that much, but there was no color. On the 4th class, I got a 14-inch color TV, then it all started. This is when I started writing my first games. A few of them survived, and I'll gladly release them somewhere so we can have a laugh. I of course used BASIC, but I compiled using the Polish Tobos FP, a very compatible compiler. Unfortunately very slow to the point that I quickly switched into IS, a compiler without floating point arithmetic, but therefore faster and closer to computeric understanding. I also got to know the assembler through debugging a number of game loaders. The side effect of this was cracking cracked games. In hopes that I would get a floppy disk drive for Timex, I added in file extensions so they would be written on floppy disks. Alas, back then I've never gotten a floppy drive. When have you first bought your first Amiga, and why you bought it over PC or Macintosh? One of the first I had bought after my Matura exam in 1991, it was an Amiga 500 bought in Berlin. Therefore, it had a German keyboard. I bought it in Germany because it was cheaper there than in the Amiga. I chose the Amiga because the PC was shit back then. The games were poor, the VGA was iffy, and hardware prices were extreme. Plus, an external monitor was needed, which further inflated the price. Mac was, and remains to this day, expensive and not very popular in Poland, to the point that I have not even heard about it. And then iPhones happened. In what language are Amiga games coded? And the only tool that allowed to produce something quick and make adjustments, thus the Amos language. Sure, there was also Blitz Basic, but that came later, and it wasn't as easily available as the Amos. I used the 1.34 version, then I switched for Pro 1.0 and Pro 2.0. I'll defend this platform. It was a really powerful one, especially with the Amos American animation language. Every engine of our games was based on the AML. The pure Amos itself was just a collision detection loop and nothing more. Every character movement is Amal. Of course, Amos and Amal had a lot of issues, some of which we weren't getting around with. The limit was the length of the Amal script. It had to be compressed, and there wasn't space for that. Potential and imagination were not aligned with what the software has offered. Another thing was limited availability of the Amos language. The guides came a lot later. In Draghi and Croco were first, and only time procedures were used in a code for a number of things. I wrote my own Amos extension, but that was our last Amiga game, so nothing has happened. What gave you the most trouble while programming Franko? The fridge gave me the most trouble. No, seriously. In our home, the installation of my room was linked directly to the one in the kitchen, and sometimes it happened that my computer resetted whenever the fridge turned on. What the hell was wrong with times back in Poland?
Times back then were generally rather interesting.
Dude, I just want to get my soda, but I'm almost done programming this level of Franko. On a serious note, most of the challenge stemmed from my lack of knowledge in that regard, and I had to figure out things by experimenting, intuition, and trial and error. Back then, there were no readily available tutorials like we have now. I remember starting out with the control of the bald guy in leather jacket. I drew him in 4 colors and used 4 movement phases. Then, Marius, the graphician, adapted the... Marius. Adapted the character, giving him more colors. On programming grounds, I also suffered from the lack of hard drive. Yes, Franko was developed without that luxury, which was rather cumbersome and time-consuming with 5 discs. That's how much the initial version had. Fortunately, we had Buddy Bull.
What's going on?
who had an
Something's.
Amiga 3000 with a hard drive.
Uh, are you guys still on?
I'm on.
Because I think something just happened.
I'm fine. I'm here. Mike's just muted.
Yeah. So
Alright.
anyway, let's go on.
Alright. And I borrowed his computer a few times, which made work much more manageable. And in the end, I of course have to complain that my primary limitation was memory. The standard 512 kilobytes of chip RAM and the 512 kilobytes of fast RAM. And these limitations weren't helped at all by their giant bitmap levels. The limitations have forced me to split the game screen into lines and doing the jumpy scrolling, which was doubly compressed with an algorithm similar to zip, hence the choppy scrolling. Have you or the World Software colleagues have identified with the protagonists, Franko and Alex? We with the musician still think the game that the graphician drew Franko in his image. Alex was a completely fictional character originated out of the graphician's mind. Reminds me that when we started attempting to create the game, I went to the graphician and we had a deluxe paint 3 out of 4 boot up with Franko. Back when he still had a mustache being drawn in EHB mode. 32 colors and 32 darker shades of them. Of course I had to put Mario's ambitions down, and the character was shrunk to the current sizes and decolored. Not many people know that the graphics in Franko compress very well due to the lack of dithering and other color emulating tricks. Lots of people complained about the roughness of the graphics and other stuff, but we were fighting a battle with hardware memory. Back to identifying with the characters, I wasn't big on beat-em-ups. I was more, and still am, into strategy games, but that didn't impede with me coding Franko. Mario had a concept, he told me what he wanted, what would be included, and how it all looked, and I was telling him whatever can be done or not. Overall, it wasn't about skill, but operating memory, something I'm sure I'll mention many times. Were you proud of the engine you coded for Franko? The Franko engine was what it was. It was our first product, and I'd say that it was a deep water for 3 dudes from a province, as most people started out with static games. And besides, it isn't easy to program a beat-em-up. First was speed, and second was creating a primitive AI. From the more interesting things I remember, I can recall doing so that if 2 dudes were standing on the same side, one of them travels to the other side. Silly things that were nonetheless pretty crucial in the game. I remember when everything was done, the graphician came up with the idea to have thrown enemies work like projectiles that would damage other people. Lots of things had to be changed, but there were no compromises. Whatever didn't tax on memory had to be done. Then I remember the graphician being mad at me when I defiantly refused giving Franko a co-op option. I had just enough overhauling everything. For Domon, however, I couldn't get away with the same thing. Why isn't the thrown enemies as projectile featured in Domon? I thought to this day that it was implemented. I'm not sure why it's the way it is, but there probably is a reason why it isn't there.
I just
The past-
in Doman, as far as I know, there were no throws actually in Doman, which explains.
Well, that was a goofy question. I didn't play Domon. Would you like to answer this question? The password feature in Franko is done in a weird way. On the title screen with no confirming effects in the form of sound effects, screen flashes, or other things. What was the reason for that? I think the graphician insisted on not giving the game any passwords whatsoever. The passwords were made for testing purposes. However, I left them in for the retail game. Secret passwords that don't appear anywhere in Franko or Domon, aside from the level codes in the former and the secret AK-47 weapon in the latter, like the code in Franko for enabling crude scenes or level codes in Domon. Many people think to this day that Domon is meant to be played from the beginning, however, there are a few level passcodes. The codes were supposed to be a surprise. If the internet was common back in the game, I'm sure everyone would have found out about those. say something about moral, crude scene activation code. The code applies to a scene after defeating the first level boss in which our hero pisses, I'm not into piss, on the defeated. It really offended the publisher, so we had to cut it, and so we did. However, we gave the ability to see the scene through a code. However, just before the game would be shipped, we modified the code so that the game would load up with the code already activated. I confirmed that myself after I looked up the source code. We intentionally misled the publisher. That was a cool gadget for us. Wow, he just pulled some Kenji Eno shit there.
Yeah.
Another why question I'm interested in getting an answer for. Why does Franko have these bonus stages in which we run over the pedestrians with a Fiat 126p while there's no such things in Domon? From beginning to end, Franko was a joke about our reality. The bonus stage was my joke. I drew something like a crappy counter, drew a counter, and made silly driving sim, and I showed the other two dudes. They liked the idea, and the Grafician drew the Fiat 126p. Other vehicles were considered, but then, disk space. As for driving over pedestrians, whoever knows the Grafician knows only he would come up with the idea. Meanwhile, Domon was supposed to be serious, and the only thing we shoved in was Franko's cameo in one cutscene, and of course the AK-47 secret weapon. We wanted to give a bonus after beating the game so someone would replay it with a code, hence it shows up in the ending. Why are there no retry and ignore features on Disk Dupa? Or Disk
Dupa. Disk Dupa.
Stupid me, the pronunciation was right next to me. As well as the translation, literally disk ass screen. I can recall playing Domon with my brother on a hard drive, and sometimes the screen showed up mid-screen, and it was indeed ass. Disk dupa shows up when a program gets a low disk error, like not finding a required file and stuff. We weren't able to check everything, and another attempt at reading at the damaged disk, every Amiga user knows that it would only end in an endless scratching. What tools were used for compressing data on Franko and Domon? They don't have the standard Amos banks. There are banks, but they are further compressed with squash command, hence the loading times in our games. It saves memory but not times, you think? Squash is less reliable compression algorithm than zip, but much faster. The compression level is huge. A typical Franko character bank takes half the space it would take when uncompressed. Why do the bosses in Franko tend to leave the screen for quite a while? It's rather annoying and not very practical. Because they have to take the kids to the other side of the street, lol. On a serious note, this is a program error. The boss simply on his own algorithm circles around the protagonist, and unfortunately it sometimes happens that he could be overly mobile. Do you remember which enemies you voiced in Franko and which samples exactly? I don't remember. From the stuff we've recorded and further filtered, it's impossible to recall. That vomit sound is certainly mine. Do you remember the places you base levels on in Franko, and why'd you choose them? The game begins on the Ridla Street?
Lidla Street.
Lidla Street, which was where the Grafician and the musician lived. Then we had the center of the city, which reminds me. I had an idea that between levels, Franko would travel with a bus, and of course beat the bad guys in it. Obviously we scrapped the idea due to disk space concerns. We picked the center because of the recognizable trade and service facilities. Sure, there is one oversight in that no one can tell that Franko at one point crosses to the second side of the street. We mixed some things up basically to not have the player always go right. The last level is my settlement, and it's the road from the bus station through under my locum. Did I do it right?
Hold on. Locum, but I think that would be... I think he basically meant his home or something like that. But yeah.
The level ends on a bridge, which, as far as I know, was closed for traffic in 1987, then rebuilt after a couple of years. while the first and final boss was fictional characters, like the Amisoft owner is a real person. How long did the development of Franko and Domon take? Was Domon based on the Franko source code, or was it completely rewritten? Franko took the longest, starting in 1992, and basically the 5-disc version was already ready in the same year. We were basically waiting 2 years to be published, all while doing adjustments in the meantime. Domon took us a couple months, and wasn't based on Franko. Everything was written from scratch. A few procedures were borrowed, but only from the menu code. We never considered doing a follow-up that would base on the predecessor's engine. The Graphition would never allow that. As we tried to take out a number of things, I'd say the next games would have taken us a mere 3 to 4 months if we only focused on that. What were the inspirations for the enemy characters in Franko? They were our buddies from the settlement and a number of randomly modeled people, which again contradicts that guy who said they're not based on anyone we know. In this regard, the Graphition had free reign. The primary goal on developing Franko was that the entire game would ebb set in Poland. Hence, we intentionally put in the landmarks we knew.
And as well as we intentionally misspell some things.
If you go back to 1992, then you'd realize that there was no typically Polish game. I'd even say back then there was not even a Polish commercially released Amiga game. Alas, the production processes made it so Franko came out in 1994, and thus we ended up not being the first. Why didn't you do a smooth sequence where Domon protagonists go into water, and why do they always fight with their basic weapons? On the first, weapon sprites were independent of the character, which gave us bigger weapon cloning capabilities, and lessened the space the objects took on memories. That approach caused colossal screen sync problems, though. We had to scrap it in favor of full sprite sets with weapons drawn in them. Water was an idea added because of the disk space. We had to limit the amount of weapons. As far as entering the water sequence, from what I remember, Marios did draw that. But of course, that had to be cut due to the previously mentioned concerns. The Graphition have said in the interviews that bodies were disappearing in both games because there is no memory for more enemies. So why do corpses in Domon disappear even on the Amiga with extra enemies? Because that simply wasn't implemented. We didn't want to paint the corpses into the background, which looked like they were lying flat and the heroes walking over them like on a road. For the proper look, the dead would have to be alive on the screen, and there was no memory for that. You wrote the manual for Domon. Have you wrote documentation for the other games as well? Yes, aside from the Graphition's introductory backstory. Let's talk copy protection. Well, did I hear you right? Did I hear you saying that you're gonna make a copy of a game without paying? Come on, guys. I thought you knew better. Don't copy that floppy. Holy shit, I actually remembered like a part of the lyrics. Anyway, I wouldn't call it copy protection. More like hassles for inexperienced users. Code sheets were used rather than pro forma. Who knew it was possible to simply copy them? That was common sense. Really. I even saw a number of copies of code sheets drawn with pencils and crayons. Besides, the Xerox copier wasn't that rare. In Draggy and Coco, I did a trick so a cracked copy would start you with less than 5 lives. Jerk. Because the games were supposed to work with hard drives, I didn't fiddle that much with disk access outside of DOS, which would make copying harder. Not gonna lie, the crackers these days cracked protections for loads of cache. We only focus on slowing the distribution outside of retail. Unfortunately, as it is in the case of our country, games prices were huge back then, and I'll begrudgingly admit that I don't blame folks that copied illegally. Alas, that effect was that we didn't make anything new. The moral simply goes down in that case. We didn't make Franko for the money. Ironically, Street Hassle was done for the money, and I'd rather not lie about that as my memory's fuzzy. but something tells me we made more money on it than on Franco and Domon. Royalties are another story. Speaking of royalties, can you further elaborate on that? Of course, we didn't earn a fortune. Everything we earned we spent on hardware. We bought a number of hard drives, 3 Amiga 1200s, and a number of stuff. I'll have to openly say that we were in a way mistreated by Mirage, possibly because we felt like they forced the cash down on us. The settlement system was also unclear. I'd rather not accuse anyone, but we had info from local distributors on how many legit copies were sold in the month of Stettin. It didn't translate to what Mirage was showing us. The matter is that I'm the most bitter on that nobody wanted to invest in us. Sure, Mirage bought us a digitizer and a Kickstart 2.0, but that wasn't enough. With more goodwill from the publisher, we could have done a lot more in the pseudo market of the time. You brought up Street Hassle, the game supposedly made just to try out some things. The game was not supposed to be released. Mirage proposed that you release the game and so it happened. Do you remember what was tested and how it went? Yes, we were trying to smooth scroll fights with lots of enemies and a number of other things. I don't remember exactly. Nonetheless, as I've said before, we only finished it for the money as it was a weak game. What do you think about the PC port of Franko? A lot of changes were made compared to the Amiga version. You could backtrack, there was an intro, enhanced graphics, and moves bounded to separate keyboard keys. Initially, the PC game was targeted to be loaded from the hard drive, and it would have had a lot more available memory, so we didn't have a chance. Same with graphics. I won't say much about the rest. Personally, I was bothered with the flat jump kick. Ours had an arc. How much were you involved with the PC port, if ever? The publisher have forced the PC conversion, or did you have any input with the porting process? From what I remember, I gave some tips to the PC porter.
Pavel Bolkovsky.
Bolokowski, okay. While the World Software Buddies have sent him materials. We were opposed to doing the PC port without our involvement, but oh well. Why you had no input in the PC port of Franko? Basically, we lived 600 kilometers away from where the PC port was developed, and we didn't have any internet connection. You see, now that one is like a distance. Are you satisfied with the PC port? I would have either converted it accurately or expanded upon it. I'm not the one to judge, though. That's the players. Can you recall Domon being considered for a PC port? I don't, but there are probably no plans for that. Mirage simply was not interested in publishing violent games despite Franko's commercial success, and the fact that they published Franko in the first place. Say something about the mythical green bag. The mythical green bag was part of the parachute set, and I used that to transfer the material for the dudes. There was no backpacks and similar stuff available, and transporting shopping bags that left paint in the hand. Just wasn't nice. As nobody ran around the city with that bag, it burned into the dude's memories. What the hell did I just read? This is like an in-game context, right? I'm not tripping.
Well, I was surprised that some kind of question have we surfaced. Maybe he was referring of some kind of green bag. The developers were carrying the like assets or something.
Have your wife and sons ever played Franko? No. They're not even aware of the whole thing. Maybe I'll show them one day. Were you recognized on the streets? The Graffician said in his story in this regard. How about you? Fortunately not. Maybe a number of folks would get surprised that's me. I never flaunted my involvement with computer games. That was an abstract concept in these days. What kind of beer do you like? And while at it, what would be Franko's favorite beverage? I prefer the stronger kind of liquor, War Crush Strong, when it comes to beer. And my target taste is whiskey. Of course, I also drink the clear one, but only the branded ones. The comet vodka causes headaches. As far as I think, Franko himself is the teetotaler. After he goes to the gym. Teetotaler?
Or something like, well, basically the kind of guy who would abstain from alcohol.
Oh, straight edge society.
Uh,
Hey, he's like me. I can relate to Franko now. Franko is abstinent, but not Domon. You know, abstinent can be taken in more than one way. Domon, like every hewer, prefers the stronger liquor, and I'd say he's more my kind of guy. On Franko's credit screens, your photo is subtitled, "This kid is..." whatever his name is.
this kid is... Hold on. Tomasek.
Hold on, I have a question from Evil Homer, who I'll be streaming with soon. Well, not streaming, but playing Smash with soon.
Huh.
Anyway, back to the much more entertaining Franko.
Hmm.
Franko for Smash. You're the oldest world software programmer yet. On this photo, you look like you're 13 years old. How did you do that? I was 20 years old in this photo, and I can say that I had cases where I was not allowed into R-rated movies until I showed my ID card. Fortunately, thanks to alcohol, I got the proper look real fast. And because I'm straight edge, I'm going to look like I'm in my 15s forever. Did...
Yeah, that's rough, so bad.
Thank you. Thank you. End up in your group? Mario, the Graffician's buddy, contacted us when he found out that we were looking for a Graffician. Yarick also does the music, and thus in Dragging Coco, aside of part of the graphics, you can also hear his music in a few of the levels. He showed promised, but alas, we spread our wings too late. What made you consider doing a game so different from your previous games? I was always a Rodland fan. Out of boredom, I did an algorithm of enemy movement. A square moved onto platforms and ladders, and then a number of these squares moved along, and thus I proposed the other guys doing something kiddie. Even Mario didn't protest and realized that's not a bad idea to occasionally switch around between doing smaller and bigger projects. And this square game eventually became Degenitron from Grand Theft Auto. How did the development process of the game went? After some brainstorming, in order to not make a blatant Rodland ripoff, we thought of something. Water, fire, and of course, educational element, thus making words out of the letters. We stayed with Marios 2 on his lot. Oh, for 2 weeks on his lot. Yarick and Slavik, I gotta remember that. The first musician traveled to us because they were looking and working professionally. Looking professionally. And thus, in 3 weeks, we did everything through music to graphics and, of course, the program. Level design took most of the time, and, of course, I created a level editor for that. I thought about the editor being released as an add-on to create custom levels, but nothing came of it. Probably because there's no level editing that will make you escape from load times. When it comes to the funnier things from that time, I can name TV shows. Disco Relax, in which we wept, and Mark Periot's Computer School, in which Mr. Merrick told people what a... Malik. Now they're flipping two names. So are you telling me that Malik's gonna be Merrick?
Malik.
Okay, this is where the Yu-Gi-Oh fans start revolting. Told people what floppy disks and other stuff is. It relaxed us quite nicely, except for the Yu-Gi-Oh message boards. The publisher Horn didn't release Draggy. Have you thought about finding another publisher? The Amiga market was history back then. The next game would have been primarily targeted for the PC, then eventually ported to the Amiga. Keep in mind, our enthusiasm has faded and we have to think more commercially. How many more questions are there? A lot. Anyway, tell me more about Franko 2. The game was supposed to be made for Amiga, then you decided to target the PCs. Yes, it was indeed first supposed to come out for the Amiga, but as I said before, nobody was interested in that kind of product. The PC was advancing real fast at the time. Of course, Horn was supposed to publish the game. Hold on.
Sounds like Horn let everybody down.
Horn, how could you betray us?
And I can't believe I have let this other guy myself down, because I don't have quite idea what I'm supposed to. Hold on, there may be this one. Is Arpa back again, or am I just...
I'm here.
Yeah, I heard him breathe just now, so...
Oh, that was me coughing because this interview is giving me cancer.
It's the bitmaps, man.
I got, like, tumors all over my bitmaps. You don't even want to know.
Better convert them to tiles quick.
PNGs, help me. PCX, why have you forsaken me? How far did the development went? We worked on it for half a year, and this time, aside from part of the graphics, an entire engine was developed. Amos was replaced by C++, while Amal was replaced by what I would call SEC, a script sequence. Rendering procedures, scrolling, etc. were made entirely in the state machine code optimized for the Pentium. 100 objects were independently displayed in a single frame in a Pentium 90. God, I'm feeling old. I spent most time on procedures compiled on a Borlandish TASM, not to be confused with TAS. Franko TAS. The rest was compiled on a Wacom, not the tablet. C++. The one I knew that worked on DOS in protected mode. And once again, I had no tutorials, nor do I know anybody experienced with what I was doing. A combat with one opponent was ready, complete with keyboard controls a la Mortal Kombat. I think that in another half already we would have completed the game, but we left behind because DirectX come out and everything had to be relearned from scratch. 1996 marked the definite end for us, as publisher Horn went into some troubles and the entire project hit a snag. We basically so fed up with all this stuff, I guess we lost all contact. The source code, along with the compiled example, was stored on a CD I lent to a buddy 10 years ago, and I guess... what is wrong with my Windows? And I guess we can forget about that. Would a Franko 2 ever come out? As you know, a GBA game was in development. I had no involvement with that project, but it tempts me to get my ass off and do it for my own satisfaction, especially when the hardware capabilities for 2D games are practically limitless now. Similar question about the Kaiko and Coco beat 'em up. Yes, we plan to do a beat 'em up based on the comic book series for the Amiga, of course. From what I remember, a guy from Mirage Software thought that the comic author
Janusz Krista
wouldn't allow violence to be inserted into a product that would use his IP, even though he made a comic. We dropped the project half a year later. Another company did an adventure game based on the series. A number of things were ready, like animations of the Carpal and the Cocos. Hold on, I'm getting complaints from my other guy friend.
What is something going on?
I was supposed to like do something with someone at 6, but since I'm almost finished with this interview, I might as well just knock it all out. Maybe
Perhaps.
maybe I'll show you this. Oh, could you tell me something more about Miami Nice? That title just kind of made me cringe a little. Maybe I'll show you this one day. Miami Nice is the name of a disco club in Stettin. The protagonist is a dude who ran around with a knife through our city for the revenge, like someone kidnapped his chick or something like that. Yeah, I'd run around with a knife too if somebody stole my girlfriend. I'd say that was the precursor to the Franko game, just for the ZX Spectrum. I have all the material, source codes, graphics levels, and maybe one day I'll put this all together and release it as a piece of trivia. The game is important enough that it convinced me that I can do something. It started our short career. At least the game's more important than the name of not important. I'm like trying to convince him that I'll make up for the lost time. Were you surprised that someone interviews you 14 years after Franko came out? A bit, yes. That is kind of an understatement. Like, if somebody interviewed me about a game that I like made 14 years ago, I'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I'm not a guy who likes publicity. Initially, I even thought about refusing the interview, but I'm sure a number of people would like to hear these thoughts. Personally, I'm more interested in the guy who couldn't travel 2 miles. Or that guy who sat on his Amiga.
That's even more interesting.
Tell me about your computer collection. One day in 2004, I sat around my computer, looked at an empty wall, and thought it would be cool to hang some 8-bit machine as a gadget. Then I thought that every model I had, maybe the ones I used at least once. I went to an online auction site. Oh, action site, not auction site, my bad. The vintage computer category, to be exact, and it all started. As of 2007, I had at least 54 different copies of computer. Yeah, that's a collection. I simply have a couple of Amiga 500s, a A600, and even 2 A2000s. I count them as one even if they come in different versions. I also have a lot of expansion cards. Franko, the early 90s, past century, the beginning of capitalism in Poland, new currency, new Relias. The 2000s were about to be passed as of this interview. Meanwhile, there is a fan film where a number of folks reenact the events of your games. That does not sound concerning at all. What do you think is your work and world software immortalize you? Some group of people would probably forever remember you for Franko. I saw this fan film. Oh my god, it actually does exist with a YouTube link. I gotta see this on my own time.
Maybe once you'll be done streaming, reading this interview. Because sometimes the Vine guys, sometimes every now and then do post and view YouTube videos on within their own streams. So maybe once you'll be done with the interview, maybe we'd get around watching this flick on this stream.
Once I'm done with the interview, I'm gonna have to leave because my other friend is pestering the crap out of me right now.
Figures.
All I know is I hope to God the Flasher makes an appearance. And the guy that was like in shorts and a thigh highs that was in the background. And a beret.
Alright, so move on.
Alright. I saw this fan film, and I'm surprised someone still remembers to the point of doing this flick. I wonder if they base it on the Amiga original or on the PC port. By the way, the film is for people who did play. A lot of people just get confused watching this film. That's kind of understandable. Oh well, they just don't know what's going on, and to them I'll say,
Spadaj piedobo.
oh, yeah, that thing that goes on in the game all the time. Well, I would gladly go around with buddies and break the railings of famous bridge the final boss hails from. That better be sardonic. Who did the logo of the group and why a spider? Mario's, the Griffish at the time. Why a spider? I don't know. It could have been a Necco apple spider. That could have been some brainstorming. My memory's really fuzzy. Who voiced the narration on the logo screen? The voice work is in English and it's hard to understand. Do you remember what did it say? Mario's. It was supposed to say World Software Presents, but unfortunately it's hard to hear it because of space issues. Disk space issues. The quality is even worse than the telephone one, and that's to say nothing of the effects we used. We were going for the crypt-like effects, but as you can hear...
And by the way, personally, when I was hearing the logo intro, to me it sort of sounded like, what the fuck was that? Oh, that. So anyway.
Didn't Mirage object to messages written like minimum 1 megabyte dumbass disk, etc.? Of course they did. Initially, words like
Kurva and chuj.
and were blasted throughout the game. In protest against ruining the atmosphere, we had to replace a few samples with something else, like the tiny voice.
Who does?
Furthermore, we had to cut off some samples in place of...
So you bitch.
Well, that's one way to say I'll fuck you up. There's...
Just zajebie.
Not gonna lie, that did ruin the fun a bit, but oh well, I understand the relia of censorship and decency, but on our streets a thug doesn't scream, "Hey dude, pardon me, would you treat me with a smoke or else I'm going to be said?" He just goes, "Hey you fucking cunt, hand over a smoke or else I'll fuck you up."
Who gets that desperate for smoke?
I don't want to know. Would you buy an Effica soon after the release of Morph OS 2.0? A year ago, I wasn't even sure what it is, but now I think it's not a bad idea. The PC market of 2008 have ate itself up and circles around heated up processors and loud fan coolers. Dude, you worked with an overheating machine you had to wear gloves to operate. I'd say my return is very possible, especially when some time ago I had one computer in home, and now I have space for lots of them, even though you already have lots of them. What do you think of the Amiga 4.0? I saw it once on the internet. It looks interesting. And besides, before the Switch, I regularly used an Amiga 1200 with OS 3.9 with Blizzard 1260, coupled with the graphics card, and thanks to that, I know how faulty Windows is. The interview was in 2008, back when the abominable Vista was the most recent Windows at the time. I like to think the Nuns, thing is actually like an emoticon that matches anyone's reaction to Vista.
Yeah.
Like
How do
the
how
end
do you
is...
get your? How do you choose the end though?
I think that's a bloody tear. Like he gouged his own eye out with a knife after getting Vista crashed again.